Camille Laurent had always believed that the finest view of Paris was not from the towers and terraces the guidebooks advertised, but from the patchwork of zinc rooftops, where chimney pots jutted like polite elbows and geranium boxes blushed against slate-blue sky. Her small corner of that world stood atop an 1850s building in the Marais, 20 square meters of wooden decking hemmed with raised beds of thyme, strawberries and dwarf tomatoes, 2 iron café chairs, and in the sunniest spot 3 pastel-painted beehives. Every dawn, Camille climbed the narrow service staircase with a basket of tools and a thermos of chicory coffee, greeting her tenants, over 80,000 honeybees, as though they were concierge, confidant, and chorus all in one. She had learned to read the pitch of their buzzing, the tilt of their tiny heads, and especially their dances. A waggle to the left, an angle of 25 degrees, lavender on the riverbank. A longer run and a jubilant hum, acacia in full bloom near the Canal Saint-Martin. Her neighbours affectionately called her La Traductrice des Abeilles, the bee translator, and the cafés that bought her rooftop Marais honey swore it carried hints of whatever secret Paris whispered that season. It was a rectangle of ordinary Monday sky that first told Camille something was amiss. The bees were leaving her hives in orderly streams, as always, but returning in loops and scribbles, zigzagging above her head before spiralling down. A few collided in mid-air, an indignity they usually avoided. When she opened the nearest hive, the scent inside was sharper than usual, almost metallic, and several bees carried microscopic flecks of glitter on their thoraxes. She brushed a speck onto her fingertip. Under the sun it flashed violet, then green. Pollen, yes, but a very odd sort. "Qu'est-ce que vous avez trouvé, mes petites?" she asked, frowning. Her bees only hummed louder, performing a frantic miniature carousel on the comb. Camille fetched a notebook. If a waggle dance mapped an angle from the sun, and the number of abdominal shakes suggested distance, then somewhere within roughly 250 meters, and at an angle of perhaps 40 degrees northeast, her bees had located something unusual, something far more dazzling than clover. She was still sketching flight vectors when the first siren echoed over the tiled maze. Down on the Rue des Blancs-Manteaux, police cars wedged themselves against the curb between a perfumery and an Art Deco apartment block. By lunchtime, the neighborhood buzzed louder than any hive. Madame Dupont, who walked a toy poodle in a sweater knitted to resemble the Eiffel Tower, stopped Camille on the stairwell to relay the scandal. "Robbery," the old woman whispered, eyes sparkling behind pink spectacles. "The jeweler on the 3rd floor of number 82. Gone, his entire private stock of colored diamonds. They say it happened some time after dawn. Colored diamonds, metallic pollen. Camille's bees had been out at dawn. That afternoon, Lieutenant Marc Lenoir, a mild-mannered policeman with whom Camille shared an occasional espresso at the corner bistro, appeared at her rooftop gate. He wore a short cotton trench and the expression of a man forced to believe 6 impossible things before lunch. "Camille, I have a curious favor to ask," he said, removing his cap. The security camera on the jeweler's balcony was blocked by a tarpaulin, and all we have is a witness who swears she heard wings, large wings, just before the alarm went off. The only large wings nearby belong to pigeons, but they don't carry off diamonds. "Nor do my bees," Camille answered carefully. He colored. "No, of course not. Only—" he gestured at the cloud of bees roving overhead. "If you noticed anything out of the ordinary this morning?" Camille considered the sparkle on her fingertip, the frantic scribbles in her notebook. The story would sound preposterous. Yet Lieutenant Lenoir had once accepted a tip from her when a swarm led her to an abandoned roof garden where a rare peregrine chick had stranded itself. He believed a little in her insect whispers. "I did notice unusual activity," she admitted. "May I have until tomorrow to make sense of it? Bees do give directions, but their language is geometry and sunshine." He arched an eyebrow. "If your interpreters point to a culprit, let me know." The moment he left, Camille set up a makeshift observation post, a folding chair, binoculars, and a fresh notebook. By late afternoon, she could confirm that her bees flew a consistent corridor, straight from the hive, then angled sharply toward an ornate wrought-iron balcony on the apartment block opposite number 82. That building, number 84, housed a warren of art studios. Most units had skylights wide open in the heat, and anyone nimble enough could scurry across roofs the way chess knights hop boards. At dusk, Camille visited Jean-Paul's café for her usual lemon verbena tisane. She found the owner gossiping with a lanky young man in paint-splattered trousers, Adrien Gautier, a botanical illustrator renting Studio 6B in number 84. "Terrible, the theft," Adrien said, shaking his head. "They had detectives stomping through my corridor all morning." He dropped 2 sugar cubes into his espresso and stirred nervously. Paint flecked his knuckles in jewel tones. If only windows could talk. Or bees, Camille thought. She excused herself early, stopped at a hardware shop for a roll of orange baling twine, and climbed back to her roof at moonrise. With practiced fingers, she stretched the twine across the decking, aligning it to match the grand arc of her bee's flight, 40 degrees northeast. Then she measured out the waggle duration she'd observed, converting it to distance as Professor von Frisch had once done. Every 100 meters roughly equals 75 milliseconds of waggle. Her pencil scratched figures like impatient cricket chirps until she landed on 215 meters. The tip of her string landed not on the jeweller's balcony, but 1 floor above it. A narrow stone ledge cluttered with potted oleander and a half-finished watercolor easel. Adrien Gautier's studio. Camille slept poorly. In dream after dream, bees flickered like tiny lanterns, spelling out messages she could not read. At dawn, she tied a lavender ribbon around her braid, a small ritual of courage, and carried 2 glass jars of honey downstairs. Whatever she discovered today, she told herself, she would still be the gentle gardener who traded sweetness for bread. Number 84 had no doorman, only a tarnished brass directory and the aroma of oil paint. Camille pressed the buzzer for 6B. Adrien opened the door, still wearing yesterday's paint-streaked trousers. His eyes widened when he saw the honey jars. "A thank you for lending me your spare rake last month," she lied breezily. "May I impose on you for a glass of water? Rooftop stairs are thirsty work." He ushered her in. The studio was charming in a disorderly way. Canvases leaned against every wall, most depicting wildflowers or herbs with obsessive precision. In one corner stood the aforementioned easel, beside which sat a low wooden crate filled not with brushes, but with shards of coloured glass, ruby, canary, and teal. "Testing sunlight through pigment," Adrien explained when he saw her glance. "Helps me capture luminosity." Something glinted beneath the pile, a small velvet pouch stitched with a jeweller's mark. Adrien noticed her noticing. He coughed, moved between her and the crate, and offered a tumbler of water so abruptly that a few drops sloshed over the rim. Camille accepted the glass, scanning the high windows. Each one opened onto a lip of gutter wide enough for a foot. Beyond, rooftops rippled toward the river like hammered pewter. She could almost visualize an agile thief crossing that corrugated sea before slipping through one of these skylights, diamonds rattling softly in a velvet pouch. "Your bees were lively yesterday," Adrian remarked, pouring espresso into a chipped cup for himself. "They kept hovering outside my window. I worry they might mistake my turpentine for nectar." Camille feigned a laugh. "They do get curious." She set her tumbler on a side table, withdrawing her phone. "May I photograph your newest canvas? I maintain a little blog on urban flora." "Of course," he said, turning to adjust the painting's angle. While his back was turned, Camille crouched by the crate, gripping its edge for balance as though tying her shoe. She confirmed the velvet pouch, stitched initials. J.B., the jeweller's name, Jacques Beauregard. Inside, she could make out irregular lumps wrapped in tissue. She slipped the pouch into her jacket pocket, heart thrumming as loudly as any hive. Camille snapped 2 hurried photos, complimented the shading of his lilies, and excused herself, citing a delivery. She barely reached the stairwell before her legs threatened collapse. Back on her own rooftop, she pulled the pouch free. 4 colored diamonds blinked up like bewitched candy. The bees' gilded dust must have come from the polishing rouge that clung to stones. Adrian, in preparing to paint their sparkle, had contaminated himself. Bees visiting basil blossoms on his ledge collected particles. She phoned Lieutenant Lenoir. "I have something you need to see," she said. "Bring a warrant, and maybe a jar of smoker fuel if you'd like help collecting evidence." While waiting, Camille donned her beekeeper's veil and tended her colonies, murmuring thanks in between puffs of cedar smoke. The bees, calmer now that the rogue glitter's source had been removed, resumed their gentle hum. When Lenoir arrived 10 minutes later, Camille recounted her deduction as they leaned against the parapet. He listened, incredulous yet respectful, examining the diamonds beneath an evidence cloth. "You followed a dance routine to a suspect?" he asked at last. "Technically, the bees followed it. I merely watched." She chewed her lower lip. "But we must proceed kindly. Adrian is no hardened criminal. Something about him felt pressed for time, perhaps even frightened." At Camille's request, Lenoir agreed to approach the arrest discreetly. He took the pouch, radioed for backup, and by noon Adrian was escorted from 6B under the bewildered gaze of residents carrying baguettes and parcel post. The painter's shoulders sagged under invisible weight. That evening, Lenoir appeared again on the rooftop, this time bearing 2 pastries from Gérard Mulot. Raspberry millefeuille for her, pistachio eclair for himself. They ate at the cast-iron table while bees drifted in languid figure-8s above. "He confessed almost immediately," Lenoir said. "Turns out he fell into debt after an American gallery cancelled his exhibition." Beauregard, the jeweller, had once commissioned flower studies from him. Adrian knew the diamond storage room, the alarm code, the balcony layout, everything but how to sell stolen gems without being traced. So he took them, hid them in plain sight among colour samples, and planned to return them once he found a buyer, Camille guessed. Exactly, though he never got that far. Your bees outsmarted him. Camille felt a pang. Will the court consider leniency? Possibly. No violence, property recovered intact, first offence. And public sympathy tends to grow when the conviction story involves honeybees and an amateur rooftop sleuth. He raised his pastry. To justice, with wings. They clinked pastries like champagne glasses. Days slid toward midsummer. Word of the Apis affair, as tabloids christened it, spread quicker than dandelion fluff. Tourists craned up at Camille's rooftop, hoping for a glimpse of the detective bees. Requests for her honey tripled. Jean-Paul printed a chalkboard sign outside his café. Try the crime-busting croissant, sweetened with Lancateur honey. Camille winced at the marketing, but delivered jars nonetheless. The bees seemed unbothered by fame, though they occasionally performed what Camille fancied a victory shimmy when sunlight struck their hive fronts. She added an extra tray of sugar syrup to reward their workload. One afternoon, as church bells tolled 4, Camille received an unexpected envelope postmarked from La Santé Prison. Adrien's handwriting, spidery but controlled, filled a single page. Chère Mademoiselle Laurent, it began, I owe you more than an apology. Your bees revealed my folly before I stepped beyond redemption. I am grateful. The warden allows me to paint. Enclosed is a small token. Tucked behind the letter was a postcard-sized watercolor. 3 beehives on a Paris roof, honeybees swirling like gold leaf against a twilight skyline. She propped it beside her smoker. Summer matured into amber evenings scented with honeysuckle. Camille's rooftop thrived. Tomatoes plumped, basil unfurled, and the bees, those diligent chroniclers of invisible maps, resumed their ordinary circuits. Yet she kept a new notebook ready. Paris offered endless mysteries, and sometimes the keenest detectives weighed no more than a single sunflower seed. One Saturday, Lieutenant Lenoir appeared again, his trench traded for a linen shirt. You know, he said, eyeing the horizon, the department's analytical division could use someone versed in unconventional observation. Ever thought of consulting work? Camille laughed. I thought I already was. Officially, with a stipend, he clarified, producing a slim file. Within lay forms titled Civilian Authorized Assistant, Forensic Naturalist. She thumbed the pages, teasing. Does it come with a badge for my queens? He grinned. Perhaps a miniature one. Camille looked toward her beehives, where sentries buzzed at the entrances, each flight a message traced on the wind. She signed the papers, dotted the I with a flourish, and closed the folder. Well then, she said, rising to straighten her gardening gloves like epaulets, I'd better tell the ladies. They'll want to rehearse their choreography. Below, the city softened into evening gleam, roofs catching highlights like facets on a gemstone. If a stranger had glanced up just then, they might have thought the rooftop glowed of its own accord. In truth, it was only sunlight reflecting off a young woman's smile, the tilt of her watering can, and the 1,000 amber wings of the bees that had once again made Paris safe. If only by following the rhythms written in their ancient secret dance.